This place looks like a classroom, but I want everybody to feel comfortable to raise their hands, speak up if they have questions. You've all been affected by alcohol in one way or another. And I'm sure you're all worried about your livers, but some of you are worried about your heart or some other aspect of your body. And if I don't, generally in this hour we cover just about everything, but if there's something that I haven't covered and you'd like me to cover, just ask, and we'll go over it. One of the problems doctors have in talking to people who are not trained in medicine is that they use a lot of big terms that scare everybody, and they hear a big word and they stop thinking about what's being said. I'm going to try and explain some of the terms that we use, but if there's something you don't understand, be assured that there's at least two other people here who don't understand what I'm saying either, and just stop me and we'll talk about it. Alcohol, the first place that alcohol affects us is in the nervous system. When we talk about the nervous system, we talk about three parts of the nervous system, but they're really all integrated. All these parts are integrated, but there are three parts, and the first part is the central nervous system. And that's called the central nervous system because the brain and the spinal cord are in the center of the body. Okay? The brain has all the nerve cells that receive and send messages to and from the rest of the body. This is the master central control unit for all the nervous system of the body. The cells are up here and they send wires down through the spinal cord and finally send out these wires to the periphery of the body and take in peripheral messages from the furthest reaches of the body to tell the brain what's going on. These nerves that go out of the spinal cord and come into the spinal cord from the periphery are part of the peripheral nervous system. The reason it's important to understand these differences is because alcohol affects all these different components of the nervous system in a different way. There's another specialized part of the nervous system which we call the autonomic nervous system, and the reason it's called autonomic is because it's autonomous. And by autonomous means it functions on its own without us having to think about what it should be doing. So the types of things that the autonomic nervous system regulates are things like temperature, the rate at which our heart beats, the rate at which we breathe, sweating, certain reactions like going to the bathroom. This is all part of the autonomic nervous system. I like to think of it as the automatic nervous system. Now, alcohol affects all of these three components of the nervous system. And it does it by depressing it. Alcohol is a depressant. That's not necessarily in the sense of emotional depression, but it sedates the nerves. They do not work as well or as rapidly or with as much activity under the influence of alcohol as they do on their own. So if you are drinking alcohol and you're driving a car, your reflexes are slowed because the information coming in does not connect, and your ability to react to it is not as rapid as when you're not drinking. I'd like to show you some things about alcohol and its general properties in alcoholics and non-alcoholics alike, for you to understand what's going on with you with the disease of alcoholism. If we take we're going to make a graph here, a little chart. And if we look at this part of the chart, as this is going up, the blood alcohol concentration is getting higher and higher. And this part of the graph is time. With starting here at 0 time, let's say this is 1 hour, this is 2 hours later, and we give a non-alcoholic individual a couple of shots, a couple of ounces of whiskey. The blood alcohol level will go up and then will come down. This is a non-alcoholic person. Now if we draw a line, let's say that on this line representing the blood alcohol concentration, that represents 100 milligrams of alcohol in the blood. Okay, just an arbitrary number. We look at how you perform intellectual and coordination tasks right here as the blood alcohol level is rising, and then we look at how well you do here. Now this is the same absolute level of alcohol in your blood, going up and coming down. That's the only difference. What we'll see is that you will do worse here as your blood alcohol concentration is going up than you will as your blood alcohol concentration is coming down. It doesn't matter that you have the same amount of alcohol in your body. What this is saying is that even in non-alcoholic people, the brain senses a rising and a falling level of alcohol and develops a tolerance, even in a single drinking episode. What does this mean? This means that the brain is very sensitive to rising and falling levels of alcohol. Just keep that in mind, because now we're going to talk about what happens first in non-alcoholics and then in alcoholic individuals, and you'll see how important it is that the brain can recognize rising and falling levels of alcohol. Now, for those of you who may not fully understand this, think about what it was like the last time you got drunk. It felt great getting high, the initial getting high, but later it doesn't feel so good even though you're plenty drunk. That's because that first drink of the day, you get a rush, but even when you're plenty drunk, as that blood alcohol level starts to drop, it feels different. The brain reacts differently to the falling levels of alcohol. Let's make another graph. Let's look at this line here as being normal, right in the middle here. And above this line, we're going to call that excitation. And by excitation, we're referring to the level of activity of the nervous system, or how fast and how active those nerve cells are firing. And it doesn't mean being excited like happy that you won a new car in a lottery. It means that the nervous system is more excited than normal. And beneath this line, we're going to call depression. Again, not necessarily emotional depression, but a depressed state of function, or sedation, maybe a better way of putting it. Now, when we take alcohol, let's say John goes out with his wife and he wants to go drinking and dancing one night. And John's not alcoholic, and as a couple of bourbons gets him pretty tight, he's having a good time. And as he's drinking, his blood alcohol level is going up, but he's getting more and more sedated. That's why this curve is going down. He's getting more sedated, and he's feeling good. 1 o'clock in the morning is last call for alcohol, so John doesn't drink anymore, and maybe he and his wife stay till about 2 a.m., and his blood alcohol level is falling. He doesn't have to come into work the next day, but he's got a ways to drive home, so he gets home at 3 a.m., and he's going to sleep. He says, I'm going to sleep till 1 o'clock. His little boy's being cared for by his mother, and he can sleep as late as he wants. But a funny thing happens. At 8 o'clock in the morning, his eyes open up. He looks at the ceiling. He goes, well, hey, I'm wide awake. I can't go back to sleep. And so to his surprise, and particularly his wife's surprise, he gets up and starts cleaning the house. Because he's just got all this energy. He just has energy. He can't go to sleep even though he only had a couple hours sleep, and he was pretty tight the night before. What's happened here? What has happened is that the nervous system is responding to the depression by a little excitation, sort of like a pendulum swing to the other side. This is withdrawal in a non-alcoholic person. It's not necessarily unpleasant. It may be a nice sense of energy. Why does this happen? It happens because the body tends to react to external forces by a reaction within the body to make things equal. Let me give you an example, and that statement may make some sense to you. The first day that we're still waiting for that hot summer weather that's so characteristic of Chicago. This is the first time in 8 years that I've actually experienced a spring in Chicago. But it's going to get hot, as sure as the snows will come next year. And after a very hot, humid summer, the first cool day at 40 degrees or so catches us by surprise. I don't know about you, but I always go and I tend to reach for a warm midwinter jacket because I'm really chilly that first day that it's cold outside. The reason is because my body has become accustomed to getting rid of heat rather than generating heat. The body has, through the summer, used its mechanisms to keep the body cool rather than making the body warm. So that first day, the body hasn't adjusted, and you have to use some outside protection to keep you warm. After a week of 40-degree weather, you're probably going to be feeling pretty comfortable. As a matter of fact, you'll be walking around in a regular shirt or a light sweater, and that'll be it. That's because your body has gone, oh, I see, it's cold outside now, so I have to stop getting rid of heat and produce heat, and in a couple of days you're feeling comfortable. The same thing happens when you take drugs, be it alcohol, sedatives, opiates, or cocaine, or other stimulants. If you're constantly putting a sedative into your body, something that depresses the nervous system starts to develop something to counteract that. It starts to develop a process where the nervous system will be more excited, so that in the end state, you're going to be, the body wants to be normal. It doesn't want to be high all the time. It doesn't want to be low all the time. It wants to stay at its steady state. So after a period of time of drinking, even with a brief drinking episode, the brain will start to adjust to the presence of alcohol. Now, it may be that in alcoholics that there is a different kind of adjustment that's determined because you were born with this special reaction to alcohol. It may be that you've developed this because you've drunk a lot of alcohol over years and your brain has just changed permanently as a result of that. Whatever the reason is, the brain will try and keep itself in a steady state. So that when you're drinking for a period of time, and then you stop drinking, the brain has adjusted to the sedative being there by being overexcited. So when you suddenly take the alcohol away, or decrease the amount you're taking in, suddenly you're thrown into this level of excitation. It's sort of as if I was standing holding up this wall over here, and it was threatening to fall in. And I had to push real hard. And you could look at me as being the brain trying to push away that wall of alcohol from coming down on me and totally sedating me. If you made that wall disappear, I'd be pushing and I'd be caught by surprise and go overboard and fall out into the street. Well, that's the same thing here with alcoholism. You're drinking, you're drinking, you're drinking. Your brain is trying to keep you awake and keep you normal, so it's overexcited. And then something comes along and you stop drinking, maybe because you can't, because your stomach hurts so much, or you're just too sick, or you ran out of money, and suddenly you're into excitation. So an alcoholic will not get as high with the same amount of alcohol, but the swing into excitation will be much greater and much longer, and what happens is that this is no longer a pleasant sense of energy, this is now withdrawal. This is now full-blown withdrawal, where you start to feel inner shakes, your hands shake, maybe you're sweaty, maybe you're irritable, maybe you're hallucinating, maybe you're having seizures, maybe you're totally confused and don't know where you are. It's a whole spectrum of things that can happen to you depending on what your basic body character is like, how long you've been drinking, how much you've been drinking, and with what frequency you've been drinking. But there are some more subtle aspects to this withdrawal that you may not be aware of. First of all, remember this. The body can sense rising and falling levels of alcohol. And unless you have an intravenous with alcohol dripping in at a steady rate, you can't avoid having rising and falling levels of alcohol. So what's going to happen? Well, actually, let me step back here. I don't want to go into that right now. What happens in early alcoholism, before it's quite obvious that alcohol is causing a problem, is that when you stop drinking, let's say you have a heavy drinking binge during the weekend, and you're up here and you're in that level of excitation, and maybe you're not shaking like a leaf, and maybe you're not seeing pink elephants walking through your closet, but you're in withdrawal nonetheless, but you don't recognize that. So you wake up Monday morning, and you just think you have the Monday morning blahs. And your dog comes up wagging its tail saying, hey, it's time to feed me, and you go, goddamn dog, and you kick the dog away because the dog's a pain in the neck. Or your boyfriend or your wife or whoever comes up to you and says, good morning, are you going to take me to work today? And you think, boy, is that person a pain in the neck? I wish they didn't bother me all the time. And you get into work, and your normal amount of work is on your desk, and you go, I hate work, because look at all this stuff I have to do. And you're in withdrawal, but you're reacting to the world while you're in withdrawal, and pretty soon you're saying, you know what I need? I need a drink. I need a drink because my boss, my lover, my dog, the world stinks. And how can I be expected to get through the day without a drink? Well, actually, what's going on is you need a drink, not because the world stinks, but because you're looking at the world through the eyes of a person in alcohol withdrawal. And what you really need to do is, what you want to do is just get down to normal. You just want to get straight. That's a term that used to be attributed to junkies. But everybody who's addicted to anything just wants to, after a period of time, they just want to feel normal. You don't even want to get high, necessarily. You just want to feel normal. But what makes this even more uncomfortable, the difficulty of feeling normal, is now we go to this and we see that you can't feel normal. Because as soon as you use a drug to feel normal, you feel normal for a period of time and then you don't feel normal again. Pretty soon it's that old roller coaster ride of trying to get high, but just trying to take enough alcohol so you feel okay, but you got to keep drinking. Because you never feel okay. Because it's always going up or coming down. So you never feel okay. And after a period of time, you can't take it anymore, and you say, well, I obviously have to quit altogether. And when you quit altogether, this will start to settle itself out. Now, depending on how long you've been drinking, how much you've been drinking, and with what frequency, the acute withdrawal, the shakes and the seizures and the hallucinations, that goes away in a couple of days. But your nervous system, depending on how long you've been drinking and how much and with what frequency, is going to take a long time to get back to normal. It may take you a couple of weeks before your sleep patterns return to normal, fully to normal. They'll get better in the first couple of days. It may take you a couple of months before you can really think, take in new information, and remember things as well as you did before you started drinking. And emotionally, you're going to be on edge for a period of months to a year, 2 years. External stimulus is going to be, you're going to be reacting to sometimes a little more sensitively than you would have before. It's not just long-term withdrawal, it's also the fact that you've all learned to deal with problems, with feelings, using drugs. It's going to be a new experience for you, or an uncomfortable experience for you, to deal with a lot of feelings without using drugs. And I say using drugs because I want to emphasize something. Alcohol is a drug. It is a legal drug. Cocaine, marijuana, opiates, and sedatives, whether they're taken under a doctor's prescription or not, are drugs too. And they all have similar patterns. These patterns of withdrawal are all quite similar. If you're taking an amphetamine or cocaine, something that excites the nervous system, you're going to go through a period of withdrawal, which is depression of your nervous system. So some of you might say, well, if I use cocaine, I go up, and I use alcohol, I come down, and then the one withdrawal is excitation, the other is depression. Maybe we can have a withdrawal that's right here and I'll feel normal when I'm withdrawing from both drugs together. It sounds pretty funny, but there are a lot of people out there trying it. And they just drink enough and they snort some coke, and then when they're feeling low from the alcohol, they snort some more coke. When they're feeling too jittery from the coke, they drink some more alcohol. It's called chasing the train, and it never really works very well. All drugs will have a different effect. They'll have withdrawals for different periods of time, but they'll all set you off on this pattern. And if your drug of choice is alcohol and you decide you're going to switch over to marijuana, sooner or later you'll come back to drug of choice, which is alcohol. If your drug of choice is cocaine, you say, well, I won't do coke, but I'll take Valium. Sooner or later, you'll get back to cocaine. The whole concept is using drugs to change your feeling state. That's the bottom line. We talk about experts in cocaine addiction. We talk about experts in alcoholism. It's not that simple. It's a concept, it's an entire concept of using drugs to change your feeling state. You got to give it up. You got to find other ways of changing your feeling state and other mechanisms of changing your feeling state. Using the natural drugs that do exist, we can even name them and give you their chemical structure. Using the natural drugs that the body can produce to give you your feeling states. And those are more powerful, more reproducible, a lot cheaper, and don't do any damage to your body. Well, we're not going to talk about recovery here from the standpoint of recovery from addiction. We're going to talk about physical recovery from the damage of alcohol. Before we leave the nervous system, which naturally takes the longest period of time because it's the area first and most profoundly damaged by alcohol, let me say this. The peripheral nervous system is damaged by the toxic effects of alcohol, as well as a lot of the nutritional problems that you get with alcohol, because you're not going to eat well, which we'll go over shortly. And the peripheral, it's called peripheral neuropathy, and what you will feel are numbness and tingling, usually in your hands or feet, burning sensations in your hands or feet. This damage generally will heal somewhat when you stop drinking. It will continue if you continue to drinking, but generally it heals when you stop drinking. The autonomic nervous system is also damaged by alcohol, and what you may feel at that time from damage to the autonomic system most commonly is when you get out of bed you get real dizzy, because part of the function of the autonomic nervous system is to keep your blood pressure stable. You know, when you're laying down, your blood is sort of, it's like any system of water. It sort of pools out, and then you stand up, gravity pulls it down into your legs. For a brief moment, if your autonomic nervous system isn't working well, your brain doesn't have enough blood going through it, and you feel woozy, and you have a tendency to fall down to the floor to get that blood back up there. That is usually from autonomic nervous system damage. I happen to know a couple of people in this room are having those symptoms now. It is also one of the symptoms of withdrawal. Doesn't mean that there's permanent damage to your autonomic nervous system. So relax. If there's damage to your autonomic nervous system, these symptoms last for a long time. There are also certain medications that can produce this as a side effect. One of the occupational hazards of being alcoholic is hitting your head a lot. As a result of hitting your head a lot, you get a lot of times you get some recurrent injuries to the brain, and it's not uncommon due to toxic effects of alcohol, nutritional problems, and frequent head trauma that people do become senile earlier. So it's usually a combination of things that do lead to that. And there are many other things that alcohol does to the nervous system. Most of them are, it's really not important to go into those things now, except something called Korsakoff syndrome, which is something that happens with long-term drinkers where they lose their memory. And they start, because they don't have a good memory, they make up a memory. So you say, where were you last night? And they go, well, that's a long story, and I'm going to tell you about it. And if 10 minutes goes by and they still can't remember where they've been, but they told you everything else except that. The next most important area where alcohol hurts the body is through nutrition and the digestive system. Probably this is next to the nervous system, the digestive system is where alcohol really does its damage. It starts off by making it unlikely that you're going to eat well. Why? Because you're not, first of all, your intake of food is going to go down because you have a lot of calories in alcohol. And the body thinks it's getting plenty of food, but it's getting empty calories because it doesn't have much nutritional value, hardly any nutritional value. Your intake is also going down because it irritates the stomach. When the stomach is irritated, it sends a message to the brain not to send any food down. Alcohol also directly sends a message to the brain that it's really not necessary to eat. Thank you, we're drinking today. Once food gets into the body, the absorption of the food that you get goes down. Alcohol competes or prevents many B vitamins from being properly absorbed. Folate, B12, thiamine, pyridoxine. All these drugs are, in a variety of ways, prevented from being absorbed properly, even if you're lucky enough to take them in. So it interferes with absorption, particularly of the B vitamins. Alcohol, through diarrhea and vomiting, will cause that food that's taken in to pass through the intestines so fast that they can't be absorbed in the maximum fashion. And alcohol does another thing to the area of your digestive system that's very important for absorption. Let me show you what it does, but first you have to understand just a little bit about how our intestines absorb food. Just a little bit, not too much. Our intestines are like a long tube that go through our body, a long hollow tube. Except to make the tube very, very efficient and pack a lot of surface area, this internal lining, just like the internal lining of our cheek, is called a mucous membrane. Now, in order to make this surface through which food is absorbed very efficient in terms of putting a lot of it in a small space, it's folded. So they're like little folds in the internal lining of our intestines. If we were to take a piece of this lining away and look at it under a microscope, what we would see little hair-like processes like this, nice and folded. And this allows us to get the intestines into what would be normally a 3 times larger space. You can imagine if we all had to walk around with bellies like this. It would wreak havoc with the gene industry, to say the least. What happens with alcohol, because the lining of the intestines is reproducing itself several times a day, because there are a lot of enzymes breaking it down, there's all of that shredded wheat you eat in the morning, tears off cells. A normal, healthy digestive tract is replacing itself all the time, very active cells. When you have, because of you're not taking food in, a lot of the vitamins that are necessary for good growth are being wasted. These rapidly reproducing cells get sick, and just like a baby that's not given enough food, it stunts its growth. The growth of the lining of your intestines is stunted too. And in alcoholics, you get this flattening of the mucous membrane. And what happens, this is like chopping out a whole, no, you don't have these folds now to absorb food. You have this flat, dull mucous membrane, so you've lost a large part of the surface area through which food is absorbed. So not only are you not taking food in, not only is the food that you're taking in not well absorbed because alcohol chemically competes with it, now you don't even have as much area for it to absorb the food, plus you're having diarrhea and vomiting, and all these things are working against your nutrition. So it's not surprising that alcoholics have a lot of physical problems that are either based on or complicated by poor nutrition. And it goes on and on and on. Let's show you my Anacin Man. This is not a product endorsement. Okay, and we're going to just show you where alcohol does bad things as it goes down. First of all, in the mouth. Cancer of the mouth is much more common in alcoholics and smokers, and the combination is especially deadly. So cancer is almost always seen in either smokers, alcoholics, or both, of the tongue, of the mucous membranes in the mouth. The teeth and gums generally don't do too well in the presence of a lot of alcohol, both because you don't really look after your teeth and because alcohol and the nutritional problems that come with alcohol all cause a lot of gum disease and dental problems. The tube that leads from the back of your throat into your stomach is called the esophagus. This is a neat little muscular tube that just squeezes food down into your stomach, keeps it going down into the stomach. But the esophagus is affected by alcohol by having the lining of it irritated by the toxic effects of alcohol. And you get something called esophagitis, which can feel like a burning, heartburn in your chest, burning or cramps in your chest. It also, this muscular tube, as it approaches the stomach, has this area has a specially thickened muscle that stays clamped shut, except when a wave of muscle contraction causes it to relax and let this ball of food go through it. Now it's important that this valve over here stay nice and tightly shut, because it prevents acid from coming from the stomach and washing back up into the esophagus. The lining of the esophagus is not specially coated to deal with this acid, and when acid washes back into it, it irritates it. Another cause of esophagitis. What alcohol does is it relaxes this muscle over here, so that acid constantly is irritating the esophagus. Not only does this cause a heck of a heartburn, it can also cause ulceration of your esophagus. It can cause scarring after years of injury there, with difficulty of swallowing food past that point, and it also causes cancer. Again, cancer of the esophagus is seen mostly in alcoholics or alcoholic smokers. The stomach is irritated by alcohol. That's not surprising to anybody. But it's irritated for two reasons. It increases the acid that the stomach produces, and it also changes the nature of the mucous membrane that normally protects the stomach from its own acid, so that this increased acid production in the stomach is more likely to injure the lining cells of the stomach. After years and years of damage to the stomach, you can actually burn out the cells in the stomach where they can't produce enough acid. And actually that's a dangerous situation also, because there seems to be a greater chance of cancer developing in people who don't have normal production of acid in their stomach. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, cancer also occurs with some increased frequency in alcoholics, as well as gastritis or irritation of the lining of the stomach, and a worsening of ulcers if you happen to have a tendency towards ulcers. The next place where food goes is the small intestines after it leaves the stomach. Alcohol also, there's a big muscular valve between the stomach and the small intestines that alcohol also relaxes, so that food is sent from the stomach to the small intestines before it's properly processed. And this food can cause irritation in the small intestines, and when the small intestines gets irritated, it doesn't yell at you. It either throws up or gives you diarrhea. That's the only way the small intestine can really respond to insults. Sometimes it does talk to you with loud gurgling noises, but generally when it gets really insulted, it will throw up or have diarrhea. Once food goes through the small intestines, and really most of all the important absorption of food happens after it's been processed in the small intestines. Let's stop in the small intestines and talk about two other important things that happen and how alcohol affects it. Two other things that happen when the food goes into the small intestines is that the pancreas, this large gland which lays underneath the stomach, the pancreas gets a message that food is in the small intestines, and it sends out special enzymes to break down starches and fats and proteins, so that by the time they get further down in the small intestines, they're in the form that they have to be in to be absorbed. Now, since all the body's cells are made up of starches, fats, and proteins, you might ask, well, if the pancreas has these enzymes or chemicals that break these things down, how come the pancreas doesn't dissolve itself? I'm sure that was right at the tip of everybody's tongue. Well, the reason is because the pancreas produces a special kind of, it produces these chemicals in a special form. Let's pretend that the active form of the chemical, or enzyme as it's known as, has this dumbbell shape. And it's the only active part of the chemical are the two ends right here. Well, the pancreas packages it bent over in half with the two active ends sort of tied together so they can't be active. When the pancreas gets a signal from the small intestines that the food's here, time to send down the chemicals, it sends down these prepackaged chemicals which only become activated when they come in contact with the food. And then this bond is broken, it snaps into its active form, acts on the food, and is, then safe. What happens with alcohol is it activates, it breaks this bond while the stuff is in the pancreas, and what you would expect would happen does happen. The pancreas starts to dissolve itself. That's what pancreatitis is. Generally, the body can wall that off, control that reaction so that there's just a lot of pain and inflammation. 20% of people who get this, the body cannot overcome that, and the person dies. The person dies by dissolving themselves from the inside until it erodes into a major blood vessel and you bleed to death, or you just get infected, or some other horrible complication that sets in. 80% live. Some people lose their pancreas because eventually it's just replaced with scar tissue after repeated injuries. And those people have to take these enzymes by mouth that are specially coded so they only become activated when they go into the intestines. Otherwise, they won't be able to absorb proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and you'll starve to death even though you're eating 10,000 calories a day. You'll also have to take insulin because the pancreas makes insulin, which helps blood sugar get from the blood into the body's cells. Now, the liver is out here someplace. Okay? And the liver receives all this blood from the intestines. All the blood from the intestines comes to the liver, so everything you eat and that gets absorbed passes through the liver to be screened out, checked out, processed, what have you. The liver stores sugar so that when you eat a big meal and you have more sugar than the body needs, it'll store it there for times when you are not eating and you need to call on this store of energy. It will store extra vitamins so that when you don't get enough of certain vitamins, you have some stored up there. It will activate vitamins. Some of the foods that you take in have to be activated before they can be used by the body's cells, and the liver does a lot of activating of substances. It will deactivate toxins that you take into your body, either through your food or toxins that are produced in your body. It will activate hormones. It will deactivate hormones. It produces substances that cause your blood to clot. Without it, you will not be able to clot properly. The liver is essential to life. It is a major factory that processes substances in your body. Alcohol is almost entirely broken down in the liver, and that's why alcohol so profoundly affects many body's functions, because it takes over a lot of the liver's attention, and the liver cannot tend to its business properly. As a result of excessive alcohol intake, what you get are basically three diseases of the liver. One is a fatty liver. The other is alcoholic hepatitis. And the third is cirrhosis. Fatty liver is exactly what it sounds like. The liver is stuffed with fat. It's just like big, fat liver. The reason that happens is that in breaking down alcohol, well, let me step back here. The liver produces fat. It takes the basic components of essential fats for the body and puts them together in the liver to be sent out to the rest of the body where these fats are needed. These are essential fats. If you're drinking 30 to 50% of your calories as alcohol, one of the substances in the breakdown of alcohol is needed for the movement of this fat from the liver to the rest of the body. If you're using up all that substance by breaking down alcohol, the fat that's been produced in the liver has no place to go and it just stays there. So the liver starts to swell, it gets more congested, blood flow and the flow of other juices through the liver is not as good, and you get mildly ill. Usually what you feel is a dull ache in the right upper part of your belly. You may not feel anything. It may just be something that your doctor feels when they examine you. You can feel a large liver. The good thing about fatty liver is it generally goes away in 6 to 8 weeks of not drinking. That is unlike alcoholic hepatitis, which is entirely different. Alcoholic hepatitis is just like infectious hepatitis. You have the death of liver cells due to alcohol. It is unpredictable. It most commonly happens in people who drink very heavily, particularly for prolonged binges. 20% of people who get alcoholic hepatitis do die because the liver just destroys itself even if you stop drinking. Generally, it just has to run its course and may either heal completely or heal with scarring, and scarring of the liver is what cirrhosis is called. Now, when you have, anybody in here could have some scarring of their liver. So I stuck a needle in your liver and took a piece out and there was some scarring in your liver, I would say you have cirrhosis. The Lord, in His or her wisdom, has given us much more liver than we need. So it's only when you destroy 75% of your liver or greater that cirrhosis starts to be a big problem. About 15 to 20% of all alcoholics will persist until cirrhosis becomes a big problem. You cannot cure cirrhosis. Cirrhosis does not get better. There are some things we can do to deal with the complications of cirrhosis. The only thing you can do for cirrhosis is to minimize it, and the only way you can minimize it is to stop using alcohol. And that's all I want to say about cirrhosis. You're much more likely to die of heart disease from alcohol than you are to die of liver disease, whether you be young or old. The most common, in one study done at Johns Hopkins University, the most common cause of death in alcoholic populations is due to sudden heart death, sudden cardiac death, where your heart, you suddenly, everything's fine, and then your heart goes into an abnormal rhythm, and 6 minutes later, you're either dead or as good as dead. And that's because the heart has two important systems that keep it functioning normally. One is the muscle, the heart muscle itself, and the other is an electrical system that runs underneath the lining of the inside of the heart that tells, these are 4 chambers of the heart, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. And these 2 top chambers are receiving blood from either the veins that bring blood back to the heart or the lungs after they've gotten oxygen poured into it. And they beat in sequence. You don't have to know everything about how a heart works to understand how alcohol affects it. I'm not even going to attempt to. But they beat in sequence. These 2 chambers send blood to the lower chambers in a definite sequence, so everything keeps moving smoothly. And in order to do that, you need an electrical system to coordinate that. And in order for the blood to keep moving, you have to have good muscles to keep it moving. So it's a combined effort of muscles and electricity that keeps the heart functioning normally. Alcohol does 2 things to this system. First of all, it makes the muscle weaker. Whether you have a good heart or a bad heart, if you drink alcohol and go out and run, you're not going to be able to run as far as if you didn't drink alcohol. That's the danger in the mixed message of saying, well, studies show that if you drink a drink of alcohol a day, your risk of heart disease decreases. Well, that's generally of great solace to alcoholics because they go, here's to good health. But after the possible benefit of maybe 1 4-ounce glass of wine a day, you start to get depression of the heart's ability to pump. The muscle is weakened immediately by the presence of alcohol. We also see that even in non-alcoholic and alcoholic people alike, after a weekend, a binge of drinking, there's something called the holiday heart syndrome, which means that the heart, suddenly there are extra beats. The heart doesn't have an exactly regular rhythm. And in fact, the heart is subject to a number of disturbed rhythms that normally would not be affected by after binge periods of alcohol, whether you're alcoholic or not. In the alcoholic, however, you run into a problem that is sometimes seen. It's called cardiomyopathy. Cardiac is heart. Cardiomyopathy. I just want to break this down. So these words were so intimidating to me when I first started medicine, but all this means is cardiac, which is heart, and myopathy is just a fancy way of saying sick muscle or disease of the muscle. So it's a sick heart muscle. And that can be either acute or something that's caused immediately, or chronic, something that has occurred over a long period of time. And in alcoholics, we see both acute and chronic cardiomyopathies. An acute cardiomyopathy will be the person's heart is having trouble beating, moving enough blood around, but will get better over time with abstinence from alcohol. A chronic cardiomyopathy means the muscle has slowly over the years gotten weaker and weaker. You may not even recognize it because you're 28 years old, you're fit and trim, and you can go out and run 2 miles and drink a fifth a day. And then you smoke maybe a pack of cigarettes a day. And then you just go through the normal process of aging, and 10 years later, you're 38 years old, and well, you can't quite run as far, and when you do, you get more winded. And then you're 45, and suddenly you get tired of walking up the stairs. It's because that reserve, just like you have more liver than you need, the Lord in His or her wisdom has given us more heart function than we absolutely need. And sometimes we don't know that we've worn out our reserve function until we push ourselves, or until we've grown older and a normal decrease in function of the heart or any of our organ systems has come down to the point where our normal functions are no longer possible. We can no longer walk up 3 flights of stairs without getting winded because we wasted half of our heart function due to alcohol, and another 25% has gone away just due to natural aging processes. So we're left with 25% of the function we were born with. So diseases of the heart muscle are not uncommon in alcoholics, and excessive intake of alcohol can cause at any moment an electrical impulse in the cycle, so that suddenly, instead of all these millions of nerve fibers working together as a contracting muscle, suddenly an electrical impulse comes in there, and this coordinated nerve impulse is suddenly a million separate muscles beating at once. And it looks like, if you have somebody's chest open and you see this happen, it's called fibrillation. It looks like a bag of worms. Instead of a contracting fist, suddenly you have a bag of worms, just chaotic electrical activity. The heart is no longer moving blood anywhere. In 6 minutes, you're dead. 6 minutes to worm eat. And that is the leading cause of death in ambulatory alcoholics. And you can have a bad heart or a good heart, but alcohol is what sets you up for this rhythm. So cirrhosis, as common, as we like to think that all alcoholics get cirrhosis, only 20% get cirrhosis. Damage to the heart, we're beginning to see that is a very common finding in alcoholics. I don't want to overemphasize how common it is, but much more common than we used to think. There's just one more area I want to talk about, actually 2 more. The skeletal muscle, or the muscles that we use to move our body around with, also is affected by alcohol. You can get acute problems with your skeletal muscles and chronic problems. Usually you have problems in your hips or your shoulders. You'll have trouble getting out of a chair without using your hands, trouble walking up and down stairs, trouble working above your head. This is also seen not uncommonly in alcoholics. It generally gets somewhat better when you stop drinking. Sometimes it gets completely better. The other area where alcohol particularly affects you is in your blood system. Now, your blood is made up of cells and plasma. Plasma is liquid, cells are obviously the cells. And there are three types of cells. There are red blood cells, white blood cells, and some special cells called platelets. Red blood cells are the carriers of food to all the body's tissues. They take oxygen to the tissues and they take the waste product of cells away, which is carbon dioxide. White blood cells protect our body against infection. If a bacteria gets in through our nostrils, white blood cells right here in the nose go, there's an invading organism in here. This organism does not belong here, therefore we will eat it and destroy it. The white blood cell does that by recognizing a chemical difference in the substance that's in there and by sending off chemical signals to other white blood cells to come in and join in the fight. Okay, we're going to get back to what alcohol does to all these things. Platelets, if this is a blood vessel, platelets can sense when there's a break in the wall of a blood vessel and immediately start to stick to one another to plug up this leak. So that immediately that leak is plugged up, and then they cause a chemical to go out there and start layering a special protein over the leak, and then eventually that blood vessel wall will heal. What alcohol does to all these cells is it decreases their production by depressing the bone marrow where they're manufactured, by preventing proper nutritional substances. Many of the B vitamins are important in the production of blood cells, of all these blood cells, and increases their destruction through a variety of mechanisms. So a red blood cell, which normally lives for 120 days, will only live for 80 days. And for the most part, diminishes the function of these cells, which is true of white blood cells and platelets, not true of red blood cells. If you don't have enough red blood cells, if you depress the production of the bone marrow and you increase the destruction, you need to pump the same red blood cell around the body more times to bring enough oxygen to the tissues. All that means is your heart has to work harder. And you develop what we call an anemia. And your heart has to work harder, and it's harder to get oxygen to the tissues. White blood cells are made sluggish by alcohol just like we are. They just don't really care that this bacteria is there. They'll get to it. They'll take their time. And they basically forgot to call the other white blood cells to come over there and get it, but who's hassling? So you got an infection. What am I supposed to do about it? I was drunk. It also decreases the numbers. And so as an alcoholic, you're more likely to get an infection. Platelets are also depressed in their ability to stick to the walls of blood vessels and to get other platelets to participate in stopping up this bleeding. So you're likely to bleed more. It also increases their destruction and decreases their production. I'm going to ask you for questions in just a second, but what we're seeing here, we've covered some of the ways in which alcohol affects the body. In almost all instances, alcohol poisons the different cell systems and enzyme systems and biological functions of the body. Alcohol in very small doses makes us feel good. After that, it does nothing but metabolically poison the body. And it does it in almost all of the body's systems because alcohol is so easily mixed with water, and half of our body is water. So there really is just about no organ system in our body that's not unaffected by alcohol. All I've done here is in a very short time try and give you an idea of how many things that alcohol does to you. And it's not just your liver and stomach, which is what most people think about when they think about damage done by alcohol. It's all the systems in your body. There's only one way to treat alcohol-related illnesses. That's to stop drinking. None of us have the ability to tell you, well, you can drink for 5 more years and you won't have cirrhosis. You can drink for 10 more years before you get heart disease that's of consequence. Can't tell you that. But I think that all of you are here because alcohol has primarily affected your nervous system. And you have felt the effects of the nervous system not through numbness or tingling, but through a great deal of sadness and spiritual and emotional loss that has brought you in here. That's usually the most common thing for bringing people into treatment. I'm sure all of you have had an experience of drinking on top of an ill stomach, or feeling palpitations in your chest and going, well, I'm a little nervous, I think I'll drink. But maybe if you understand some of these things, it'll help to reinforce the need for sobriety. Does anybody have any questions?